Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Need Help. Warning, my internet is terrible. So if I start sounding like a demonic voice, it's either my internet or my cool t-shirt. So, but tonight we're going to be talking about agent red flags. But first, let's just kind of catch up and see what news people might have. Scarlett, what are you working on this week?
The special edition of A Touch of Darkness was just released through the bookish box the cover was, and it is beautiful. So I don't know if you guys have had a chance to check it out, but I am in love with it, and everyone is really cute because they're afraid it's going to sell out, and I am under a rock, and I don't think it will. But yeah, so that was really cool, and Malice is in the formatting stages, so we're on the countdown. We have less than a month we had a month as of yesterday for that book to come out. So yay, lots of cool things.
Wow, that's awesome. And say hi to Jerry. Thanks for joining us. We all know Jerry, so he is an awesome illustrator for people who don't know.
Your hand, Jerry.
Oh, and Jerry is also the name of my skeleton hand that I like to wave with. So that's two Jerrys in one broadcast. Wow. Alysha, what about you? What have you been working on?
I am simultaneously trying to let my work in progress sit for another week and also brainstorm the things I want to change in it in draft 2. So I'm doing a terrible job at not working.
Okay, I like it. I usually do a terrible job at working, so no, so I think that's better. Ginny, what's happening on your side of things?
Well, I just sent off my progress materials for book 2 to my editor, like literally yesterday. So that's a little terrifying. So I'm kind of holding until I hear back from her to see what she has to say about that before I get too much further into it. And I've got a big marketing meeting team this week for book 1 for Dark and Shallow Lie. So I'm a little nervous about that because I've never done it before. I don't know what to expect, but it sounds like it could be fun. So that's my schedule.
Oh, I think Kim's frozen.
Uh-oh.
Oh no. Give her the sign.
Back.
Well, yeah, for me, Ginny was like frozen, but hopefully I'm not frozen. If I am, continue without me. Let's just dive in though to our agent red flags. So our first question is going to be, what are some red flags that your agent is not doing a good job or not doing everything they should be? And so I'm just going to start and dive in on this one because I think my focus for this would be where your agent is submitting to. And if that agent is submitting primarily to small presses, very small presses, or presses that don't even offer an advance, that would be a huge red flag because those are places that you as an author can submit without the help of an agent. And so if that's all that they're doing for you, that to me is a very big red flag. And along with that, you want to make sure that your agent has contacts with those big 5 publishers, and not just contacts, but that they know, okay, these are the editors at these specific imprints that would probably be interested in the type of book that you are writing. So they need to have a really in-depth knowledge of the types of publishers that you want to be selling to, and they need to be able to make those contacts in a way that you as the author couldn't do. So that would be my thing. But do people want to kind of add on or comment or add their own red flags? Let's head over to Alysha, because you recently signed with your agent.
Yes, just over a year ago. So before signing with her, I actually was in conversation with an agent that gave me the wrong feels. And I think we would say she gave me a lot of red flags, thankfully, in her emails. She was very kind, and I have the email like pulled up She was just telling me like, first of all, she like passed, she like rejected my book, which was fine. But then she went on to tell me like that the books I'm writing don't sell at big five publishers anymore, that even if you were to get a small press to buy it, that you won't see more than $100 for your book ever, like in eternity. And like
Jerry the Hand does not like that at all. Like, not at all.
No, she even gave me like these crazy numbers. I'm looking at the email where she's like telling me if you sell like 900 books and it's like this percentage and this percentage, blah, 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 you're going to get like $1 per book and you're only probably going to sell like 50 books in a lifetime. And so that was a big red flag to me. I was like, the first thing was, if you're an agent and you have contacts at big five publishers, you know that they're buying books. So why tell someone that you're never going to sell your book? So that made me question whether she had contacts at big five. Is she just not selling books there because she has no contacts? And for me personally, I wanted to sell to a big five. So I was like, well, if you don't have those contacts, then I don't want to work with you. Because remember, the agent works for you. So going into last January, when I got offered representation from a newer agent who didn't have a sales record yet, I really did research on her agency and where she did her internships. And I talked to a client of hers. And then I talked to my writer friends and the people that I do know who are agented, and just like kind of got their perspective of, are there any red flags here, or am I just with a newer agent? And so far, so good. She has sold since then. And I'm really happy with her, and we've moved to a bigger agency. So I'm really excited for all the support that they give, not just to her for contacts, but for me as well. So so not always no sales equals a red flag, but it's definitely a sign of like, do the research, make sure you know where they're training at, who they're working with, to make sure that they have those contacts so that the person you're hiring basically is doing the job you want them to do.
Absolutely. And because as we all know, like agenting is one of those things where you can technically set up shop and there aren't necessarily qualifications that you need. So yeah, but there are typical steps that agents go through, like those internships that you mentioned. And so that's nice to see if they've interned with a well-established agency or something like that. That can be helpful. But Scarlett, I know you've had an interesting experience kind of reaching out to agents and getting responses since you've become very successful. So have you encountered any red flags?
Well, I wouldn't say red flags, just things I don't believe, which I think is a little bit different. They tell me that I can't, or some things I do believe. Like when I reach out to an agent, like they don't know how to help me. And I think that's really funny. But they just don't know how to help me, because I think on one part they're honest, and they say like, you can't make the kind of money that you make like traditionally publishing, like traditional publishing. So, I mean, at least they're honest when they say that. But there are some things that I've kind of heard that I don't really believe. And I think that at the end of the day, like an agent is a person who's going to have their own opinions about the industry. So sometimes those opinions aren't going to align with yours, and they don't have to be. That means it's not the right agent for you. I think there's an agency a few years ago that everyone was querying to, and the one of the agents out of the three, she was super active in going to conferences and things like that, but they never sold anything. And finally, the agent just departed, but that agency is still up. But they don't talk about any of their deals or tell you who any of their clients are. I think that's the thing that's coming to mind when I was searching for agents. It's just a whole different ballgame for me now, though. So what I consider a red flag is not what y'all are going to consider a red flag.
Well, yeah, and there's a difference between someone who just doesn't meet your priorities and your goals at this time, and someone who is actually not qualified, like, to do their job, or like not necessarily like a legitimate agent. So I think that is totally different, but it's good to consider. Like, you have to know going in what you're looking for and what you're wanting to get out of that relationship. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to gauge whether or not it's going to work for you. But Ginny, you're also more recent to having signed with an agent, and but in your search, like, did you come across any red flags?
I was really sort of picky about who I queried and what agents I submitted to. So I kind of had done that research on the front end going in. So I didn't really come across a lot of red flags through the querying process. But, I think you guys have all mentioned most of the main ones that I would point out. I will say that sometimes you have to really look for those red flags. You have to dig a little bit, and then sometimes they just slap you in the face with them. Like I can specifically tell you that I heard, and this was not an agent that I was dealing with. This was just an agent I heard talk somewhere, who said literally to this group of people, you have to remember your agent is doing you a favor, because as a debut author, you can only expect to sell 100 copies of your book.
What is this?
I literally was like, did she just say that? Because like, why would anyone write a book if they thought they were only going to sell 100 copies of your book? And if your agent like seriously believes that you're only going to sell 100 copies of your book anyway, that's a big red flag. So, sometimes they're really obvious things like that make you go, what? And then sometimes you have to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, if you were an agent and you actually believe that, how could you ever make a living as an agent?
Yeah,
15% commission. That doesn't make
I
any sense.
I was just like floored. Yeah, it was crazy.
That's really, yeah. Well, so let's move on to our question about how do you research these agents and agencies ahead of time? And I'll kind of go back to something I mentioned, the red flag of, has this agent only been submitting to very small presses that maybe don't even offer an advance, or maybe their ebook only deals or something, which there's nothing wrong with that, but do you need an agent for that type of deal? Do you know what I mean? And I think looking at, not only do they have a list of past sales, but what publishers were they selling to, and going through and doing your research on those publishers. And if you go to the publisher's website, they'll often, if they have open submissions, they'll have a submission page that describes what they do. And sometimes they'll even say, like, here's our typical advance and it's $100, or here's, like, they're not an advance paying publisher or something like that. Or there are certain groups that will have kind of listings of what are considered reputable publishers. They might be very small, but they're considered publishers that give advances. And one of those is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, keeps a list of what they consider to be publishers that are at least advance paying. That's not the be all and end all though. Like, you need to dive in and do your own research and really look at the publishers' websites that these agents are selling to. And also look at the agency website. That can be a big red flag, because often sometimes I'll go to a website and it's like clearly a WordPress.com blog or something, and you're like, I don't know that this is what I would expect a legitimate agency website to look at. And you also want to see if they have, like, the larger agency, do they have information on their foreign rights reach? Do they have information on clients and these clients, and you recognize their books and things like that? So, these are the kinds of things that you can do. And of course, Alysha, you already mentioned, like, actually contacting their clients and talking to them. That's another big one. But what else would we say? Alysha, you went through this process, like we said, really recently. Are there other things that you would suggest, like doing that deeper research?
Once I had looked at, like, the agency website of the place that she interned, which was Writer's House, which I knew off the top of my head anyway, but I did go on there and, like, see her name. And then also the agency she worked at to like make sure like she actually works there since there was no like record of sale with an agency. And then really talking with a client, I think solidified it the most, because that's when I was like, I mean, I guess I could have gotten catfished. Like if she really wanted to take me under, she could have like given me a false name and a false email, but I'm hoping that like most people don't do that. So talking to the client was really important to solidify that there were no red flags, and to see like the way that this client talked about her and talked about the process of working with her, also to see if it was like a good fit. And so there's like, I feel like there's a general red flag of this agent is a bad agent for your career. And then there's this agent is not going to help you, which I think Scarlett can talk more on about like why she was looking for an agent to help with like foreign deals. But then after talking with someone else who like self-pub, you realize that you're actually doing it yourself and you're making more money doing it. But yeah, so yeah, talking with someone will always help. And I didn't have this opportunity, but I have heard other authors say to ask for a referral to a past client. I don't know how many people actually do get to talk to past clients, but I think that could really shed a lot of light onto the agent. Not that like we're being super gossipy in the writers community, but just like an honest, like, no, it was our visions were different, or like, no, she only submitted to small presses and I would have been better off self-publishing and having more control than giving her my $15. I don't know.
Yeah, if she's only selling $100 worth.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, if you can do that, absolutely. But yes, Scarlett, did you want to talk about that a little bit too? Like, how can you make sure that this person is going to fit your career needs, like whether or not they're legit?
Man, I just talked. So I do think it's important to talk to people who are on both sides. You know, I talk to you guys, obviously you're all my traditional publishing gurus. And then I talk to my friends who are self-published and people who are hybrid. And they gave me a lot of good advice, a lot of really great things to consider. So, you know, one person was very, very adamant to, you know, don't go any kind of traditional route if you think that you can do really well with self-publishing. And that struck a chord with me because I do well self-publishing. So I thought, well, I just kept coming back to that, really, like, and what is it about the end of at the end of the day, what is it that you really love about this process? And yeah, like negotiating my foreign deals, that is not fun. But luckily I have help here. I hate doing it. I hate it. But I do it. And I just got my biggest one last week. And, you know, so I do it. I don't like it. Yeah, I could probably get more money if I had an agent, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, but I just do it because I think that what I value, with self-publishing is the control that I have, this control over my schedule that I have. And yeah, it's really nice to not have to split my money with a publisher and an agent. So that's just something that I prefer to do. But I will say a resource for people, I was looking it up. Do you guys remember Predator and Editor, or Predator, whatever? There was a website where they listed all of these, but now it's Writer Beware, and they have a huge list of vanity presses or just small presses you should watch out for, or just a really great resource for all things that you should watch out for in the publishing industry. So anytime I was doing any kind of publishing research, I would go there. So that helped, but I don't know if that is helpful.
That is,
I don't know if my perspective on this is helpful.
It is, and I actually think I already linked below to Writer Beware, and it's the SIFWA page, like specifically about agent red flags. So that link should be down there. And if I
Yay.
start doing this, it's because I'm trying to get my computer not to overheat, by the way, because I'm just having all kinds of computer and internet issues today. But
Should have bought that computer when you wanted to. Remember, we had this conversation.
Oh, no, I gotta sell more books first. Come on. But Ginny, we maybe stole your thunder, but did you have any other research tips that you wanted to share?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think for me, the most important one was talking to some clients, which, you guys have already mentioned. It's really important, I think. And also, I think the fact that the agent that I was talking to was so not just willing to give me those client contacts, but excited to give me those client contacts kind of put me at ease even before I talked to them. He was like, oh, yeah, let me put you in touch with this person and this person. So I was like, okay, well, probably wouldn't be that happy about it if I was going to hear a lot of terrible stuff, right? I think one of the things that I've seen happen, I know you mentioned it being a flag if maybe that agent submits mostly to those tiny houses that you could submit to yourself without an agent. And I think a lot of times it's not just a matter of doing your research on the agent, but doing your research on what you could do without an agent. I think a lot of people that I've seen get sort of signed into that sort of situation may not know that those places they could fully submit to themselves. They think I've got to have an agent to submit anywhere. And they just don't know that that's not true, that some of those really small houses, a lot of those really tiny, tiny houses are, accept open submissions. So I think it's kind of knowing a little bit about both sides of it.
That's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just like in general, you want to go into this situation as educated as you can be. So when someone tells you something that's not quite right. And Jerry, I see, had a question, and I wanted to remind people that we are taking questions in the chat. So get those.
Oh, there are people in there. I had the private chat up. Not that we do anything there. But.
Yeah, I know we haven't used the private chat, but yeah, Jerry had a great question. Are there any examples of language an agent could give to help you be realistic about a book of yours they are selling? He says, I have lofty goals and delude myself. Well, first of all, what I would say to you, I think, is that having lofty goals is not a bad thing, and it's not deluding yourself. And especially when you are first working with an agent, and this is going to be like your debut book, you want someone that's going to go after the loftiest of your goals. And I think that's actually one of the important things to consider when you're considering that agent. You want someone who has the connections and the ability to negotiate that will potentially get you that deal. Now, I do see what you're saying. Like, if it is something that is very niche and maybe the market is not there necessarily. You want someone who understands the market enough to be honest with you, but you also want to find that person that is so enthusiastic about your work that they do feel confident that they can get you that deal that you're dreaming of, right? Like, going in, you want them to have that confidence, is what I would say. But Alysha, you might have, because you've been querying for a while, like, has your agent talked to you at all about your expectations?
Yes. So getting ready to go on sub for that first round. And even talking about like another book going on sub later down the road. She asked me first, like, what my vision was. She was like, this reads as a standalone, but also like series potential. Do you have ideas for other books? And for the one that's on sub right now, I was like, yes. In my head, I definitely know like a second book, but I didn't say second book. I just said yes. And she's like, okay, so in a perfect world, like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to talk to people. We're going to hopefully pitch it as a trilogy. And I was like, oh, so for like a whole week, I was like freaking out. I was like, I have to come up with another book idea, like a third book. But she calmed me down. She was like, no, this is what the goal is. Cause she asked me like my aspirations and stuff. And I told her, yeah, I would love to do series. I would like to publish a book a year. Like that is the dream for me. And she's like, okay, if that is the dream, then here's our strategy. And she's excited enough about my stories and like works with me in them enough to be like, all right, we're going to hit your goals. We're going to hit your dream. And even with the one, the second manuscript she read, she was like, okay, before I even ask, this reads as like a 4-book series because there's different characters. And I was like, yes, that was like, it's definitely could be a standalone, but in my dream world, yes, I would love a 4-book series. And she was like, okay, cool. And I was like, okay, so she has like the lofty goals as well, but she has the strategy mind and the contacts to like make it happen. So I know that she's not going to just like settle for like one book. She's going to really push for the dream. So
the 4-book thing is hilarious.
I love that.
It seems like a very specific number though. Like
Yeah.
It is because there's 4 main characters. So
okay.
we were thinking like for middle grade, she was, like, oh, each character gets their own book in like this world.
I love that. Like, she just knows. Like she
just knew, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, that is so cool. Well, Ginny, let's go to you next. What would you say about like, did your agent do any like setting up expectations for you ahead of time?
Yes, and they did not match the expectations that I went in having, and that turned out to be a really good thing, because I didn't really know what to expect, but I did have several agents that were interested, had all sort of read the full, and I had conversations with all of them, and the one that I ended up going with, I chose because he's had the biggest vision for this book. And right off the bat in that first conversation, he was saying, I think we can set this up in an auction situation. I think that this is going to be big, YA thrillers are big, and these are the people we're going to submit to. And the names coming out of his mouth, I was like, oh my God. So I think it works both ways. Sometimes maybe your agent needs to help you manage your expectations in a more realistic way. And then sometimes I think maybe your agent needs to help you expand your vision a little bit beyond what you might have thought originally. And I think if you're working with a good agent, they're going to do either one of those things, because no one wants to set you up for disappointment. So if you're thinking really huge, lofty thoughts and your agent is thinking this is a smaller, quieter book, it's going to have a smaller market. I can't imagine a situation in which a good agent would not be upfront about that, because to do otherwise would just be, to set you up for a really, really disappointing situation. And nobody wants that. They want you to be happy, with what you get. So I think it's important either direction.
I like that you do point out the either direction, because though my agent got be really excited about multiple book deals, we didn't talk about money, because I know that it's just it's all over the board. Like we didn't talk money, but we did talk like, even if we do just get like a 1-book offer, that's when we jump on the call and we talk about like how we can position career-wise and like if it's a good decision and stuff like that. So I think you're right, Ginny, in that they need to get you excited and expand your vision, but also they're not going to be like, yes, I'm going to get you a 7-figure deal.
Right.
But this is a really quiet YA.
That's why I think it was important that when that agent, in particular, the one that I signed with, was talking about, why we could do this as an auction situation and why he thought this was going to, be a big deal, he had the information and the strategy and the plan to back that up. So it didn't feel like I was just kind of being like, talked up or hyped up for something that wasn't going to happen. So I think that's really important.
Y'all are just jogging my memory so much, because it's been a while since I signed with my agent in September of 2015. So it's been a while, but yeah, I do remember actually on our very first call, like all the excitement and here's who I'm going to submit this to. And I love this so much. But I also remember, her kind of setting my expectations and being like, but because my first book, Skeleton Tree, it's kind of a quiet, more, a little bit more on the literary side. Like it's a standalone. It's a sad story, like a sad story about death for kids. Is this going to sell huge? So I do remember her kind of like setting my expectations, but she had already been doing groundwork. And that, I think I mentioned last time, like we ended up getting the preempt offer within like 48 hours, and it went to auction, and it was like a bigger thing than I expected. But I also remember, like, prior to signing with her, the research that I had done online about how much you might get paid for a book. I'm always like, let me set my expectation as low as it could possibly be set. And I found some blog post that was like, the average advance, could be like as low as $5,000 or something. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get an offer at $5,000. And so when we got that offer, like Ginny was saying, if I had just gone with the information available to me, and someone had, I had signed with someone and that was their level, of expertise or whatever, like they were only able to get me at that deal at that time, I would have been like, oh, great. But like, thankfully I signed with someone who had a much bigger vision and had those contacts at like the big publishers. And so when I got the preempt offer, I was like, what? It was a lot bigger than what I expected. And then when she was like, hey, maybe we could go to auction, which means we have to turn down that deal that was much bigger than I expected and take it to auction in a multi-house auction, which could technically, you could make less than that deal because they generally drop the floor to begin the auction. And I had to trust her ability to put this auction together and to make that happen. And it was terrifying, but it all worked out and we ended up getting more by doing the auction. So yeah, I think that thing, like she did set my expectations lower, but she also had that big vision of like, okay, like she had the capability to make something bigger happen. And she had a bigger vision than I had. Thank goodness, because yeah, if you set your expectations very low and you only aim for someone who could only achieve those expectations, then that's what you're going to achieve. Like you need someone who can dream a little bit bigger than you, I think. But we've left Scarlett out for a while. Do you want to comment on what we've been talking about with expectations?
Ooh, expectations going into self-pub, like that's a big thing too.
Yeah. I mean, as I consider, my expectation is I'm going to sell 0 copies as I pen name and stuff. But I think you kind of have to. Do you think you have to go into it with that expectation? I know we're going a little side note, but I mean, do you think we have to, or do you think you should go into it with higher expectations?
I think that you go into it with no expectations, and then everything will surprise you.
I guess I mean it with
I think self-publishing is what you get out of self-publishing, what you put into it. And I put a lot into self-publishing. And I think when you feel like other people don't believe in your work, you're the last person who's going to. And I did. And that's why I self-published. And I don't know that I would have gotten an agent for A Touch of Darkness. I didn't even try because I just didn't feel good about it anymore. I didn't feel good about that process anymore. And I believed in myself. And so I felt like I had enough knowledge over the years to do this on my own again. So it wasn't the first time I had done it. And then everything, because I had no expectations, every little victory was fantastic. Like just, little things like my quotes, my books being highlighted, in the Kindle versions. That was a huge victory, So if no one else believes in you, you believe in yourself, and you do what you have to make it work.
Yeah, I love that. So important. And like you said, doing your research on whatever like your plan is and educating yourself and having that belief in yourself, which can be a long process. I mean, it's not.
It was.
Like unfortunately, you can't kind of just one day be like, I'm going to believe in myself now. And then you flip that switch. Like, I wish it worked like that, but.
Let me clarify that I've been doing this. I've been writing since I was 13 and I've been trying to publish since I was in high school. So, I mean, this has been a long process. I'm 31 now. So very long process.
Yeah. Yes, it takes a long time, but that is great. If you can do that, if you can educate yourself and believe in yourself before you approach agents or start self-publishing or whatever your plan is, that is great. That is the ideal situation.
And if you fail, it's okay.
There's always a new opportunity, right? Yeah. no matter what path, there's always a new opportunity, I feel like, for you. Well, we are still taking questions in the chat, so get those in if anybody has a question. But let me go down my trusty list here. So here's a question that has come up. We've been talking about how to figure out if an agent is legitimate and do that research. What if you meet the agent at a writing conference? Is that automatically a stamp of approval? Like, I met this agent through a conference, they were speaking at the conference. Are they legit, or should you do more research? I'll turn this one over to you, Alysha.
I would say at every step in the process to do your research. I mean, there was a whole, if anyone watching is on book Twitter, there was a whole kerfuffle recently about a well-established agent who had huge selling authors on their list, who came to light that he was a horrible person, but also as an agent was doing awful things, was lying about submitting manuscripts, was ruining people's careers basically. And you can't tell that from the research that we can do online. That's why I said the like talking to clients thing, and why I think now, like in the future, I might also add, see if you can talk to an ex-client, because what happened was the ex-clients like finally came out and they all agreed on the same things that had happened to them. And so their secret was put out in the world for everyone to see. So sometimes, and that's the scary part, of like, sometimes they look fine, but they're not, and that's super scary. And I don't mean to like terrify everybody, but yes, do your research at every level possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's very difficult too, because we have this sort of stigma in the industry that you don't want to be seen as unprofessional by speaking out publicly about negative experiences that you might have had with business partners. But I think that when you can be transparent in private groups, when you're talking with your peers, like other authors, and you can share those experiences, it can be really, really helpful to people. And also just coming out of that, like we're not naming names or like talking about specific people, but I think it's important to remember that ending a relationship with an agent is not the end of your career by any means. A huge percentage of authors are going to be with more than one agent during their careers. And there's nothing wrong with that. Often your priorities have just changed, or sometimes it's something a little bit bigger than that, and you have other reasons to make that move. But yeah, Ginny, what would you say? Like, is being a really well-known agent or meeting the agent at a writing conference or something like that, is that an automatic stamp of approval, or what can we do to dig deeper?
Well, I can tell you that Debut Authors Only Sell 100 Copies Girl was someone I heard at a writing conference. So I'm going to have to go with not necessarily, although I think that's a good first, for like a first level of research. It does give them some legitimacy, at least. You're starting from somewhere. But I can't say that it's always guaranteed, because I had that particular experience. And then speaking to, what you were talking about, changing agents or having to change agents or being willing to change agents, it is a really tricky situation, because I can tell you, speaking to that particular situation that we were just discussing about the one agent, I know if you had emailed some of those clients and asked for opinions about that agent, they would have been glowing reviews, and that's because, like anyone, agents are human, and what one person sees or the face that you show to one person is not necessarily the face that you show to everyone. So in the end, you can do all those things, and you should do all those things. You have to do all those things, but that, people are still going to get by you, because people are kind of tricky. So if you find yourself in a situation where that happens, I think it's important to remember what Kim was talking about, that, that doesn't have to mean like the end of everything for you. People do change agents. People switch agencies or agents within the agencies. And if that happens, and then that needs to happen. That's okay.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because a lot of times, not a lot of times, but on rare occasions, it could be that the clients are not aware of this, nefarious activity that's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so when that's the case, there's really no way to know. And at that point, you just have to, when it comes to light, you just have to make the decision at that point, and just, like I said, like, don't feel like you're the only person who's ever had to change agents. It happens all the time. It's totally normal. And I think you should feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to go out there and find someone new and hopefully better to represent you. But now I think we always hear this saying that no agent is better than a bad agent. And so I would like to hear your thoughts on that. And let's start with Scarlett, since you have chosen not to work with an agent. Do you have feelings about that? No agent is better than a bad agent.
Yeah, I mean, I really, I would rather, I just think about, I think when you're in the business that we're in, people's opinions and the way they handle your work can have such a negative effect on you, especially if you're a debut author. So I think that could really affect, your self-esteem and just your belief in your worth when it comes to being an author. So I would very much prefer not to have an agent than have a bad agent. So I think that could be way more detrimental. And in my case, I don't need an agent. I'm told over and over again, that they don't know what to do. They don't know how to help me, which was an interesting thing to come up against, because you don't expect that. You don't expect. I think that for so long in the self-publishing world, people were turning to agents when they were successful. And so you kind of expect that that's just what you do, but it's actually not what you do now. So yeah, I prefer the way that I operate. That might change, especially, every day I get something new that I don't know what to do with. But for as long as you can do it, you can do it well. There's no real reason for it. Just know that there are other options out there. I feel like you shouldn't be discouraged because you can't get an agent, and you shouldn't it's like anything. Once you do get that book out there and you start getting reviews, for example, like, don't let that reflect on how you feel about your work. Don't let not getting an agent or whatever not reflect on how you feel about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Alysha, what would you say? Is no agent better than a bad agent?
So this phrase always confused me, because before being signed, like, that's like all I wanted. I would have signed with anybody. Which I was just like, just help me. What do you mean no agent is better than a bad agent? But yeah, now I understand what that means. It's the type of agent we're talking about that doesn't have the contacts, that can't do anything more than you can do. You can submit if you want a small press, or you could have more control and self-pub. Yeah, so now I understand, like, what that phrase means. So if you're only getting the yes from an agent that has only sold to those small presses, they're not worth your money, is basically what it means. They're not worth you possibly, like, messing up your career. Like, I heard from, I think the person that Scarlett was talking about before, the agent that had the agency and then, like, decided to leave and didn't tell anybody. And the person I was talking about earlier, like, lied about submitting manuscripts to publishers. So this whole time, for like a year or 2 years, they thought that their books were out to editors and they were waiting for a contract, waiting for money, when it was never that way. And I even heard, I don't know how true this was, but I did see in some of the subtweets of people talking that this agent had talked badly about a person's manuscript to an editor in the pitch letter, basically saying like, hey, this isn't that great, but like, if you want to read it, here it is. That's not going to get you a contract. And
I know this whole Twitter thread you're talking about. Like, I read all of it.
I did too. But like that in particular, that will screw over your career because because in publishing, you can only submit your book to like a certain number of editors at a house or an imprint. There's like rules about it. So the fact that that agent sent that book means that that author cannot send that version of that book to that imprint ever. And probably no one's going to try to like buy it because the agent was like, this isn't that great, but here you go. So
that's the unfortunate part too, is like in the literary world, we for so long put so much, we just put so, I mean, you said you wanted an agent. You were like, I don't understand that phrase. And so many people are just like that, right? It's like, you're not legitimate unless you can get an agent. That is not true, because people just want stories. So if you can write a good story, you know, I don't know. I definitely disagree with that idea that it's like an agent or nothing.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, something like that, people can recover quite easily, I think, from something like that. If someone's like, okay, you know.
Especially if it goes on Twitter like that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you can recover from that. But here's what you can't really recover from is if you sign with an agent and they sell your rights to a press that does not pay in advance. And now that press owns your rights. And that press does not have the distribution capabilities to get you in Barnes & Noble or big bookstores. In fact, maybe their distribution capabilities are limited to what you individually could do yourself by having just self-published that book. But you can't self-publish that book now because you gave away the rights, because this agent sold the rights to this really small, you know, press, and you're locked into a contract now. And, you know, it's often hard to get rights back like that, especially if they've gotten ebook rights too that never go out of print. So, I mean, I think that's where the real danger is that you get locked into a deal. And so you're not at that point even able to get the rights back and then make money by going a different route in the future. Like, that's one thing that I would be really careful of. And I would say, yes, in that case, definitely no agent is much better than having a bad agent in that case. But Ginny, do you have something to add?
I don't really have anything to add. I mean, you guys have pretty much covered it. I think, like, if I could have maybe gotten an agent earlier on, I didn't submit to a lot of those kind of questionable agencies. I was pretty particular. But if I had submitted to those agencies, I think I probably likely could have gotten one of those agents earlier, and they probably could have sold my book to one of those small presses pretty easily and quickly for a very small advance or no advance at all. And then I would have lost out. I would never have known that if I had held out, you know, another year, if I'd done a little more work or revision, or if I, you know, kept at it a little longer, then I could have had the deal that I really wanted all along. So I think that would be my main concern. You know, like you were saying, once you've done it, it's out there, you know, and you've lost your shot at getting something that is closer to what you were hoping for.
I hadn't even thought about contracts, but now it makes even more sense of like, oh, duh, the rights.
We're very feeling, Alysha. We rely on feeling.
Yes, we do. But now I'm like, yeah, oh my gosh, you're right.
I love what Ginny said though, because I feel like writers feel that pressure to get this done. Like, we talk about this all the time in publishing, where you have to be a certain age. You know, I need to be a young, successful author. And it's just like, no, like, I don't know where that came from, but no, like, a lot of people don't get their first book deal until they're like, you know, like in their 30s or like 40s.
Until they're in their 80s
or like whatever. Yeah.
Like,
there's no time limit. So yeah, I love the patience element. So important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing, talking about contracts, is that agency contract, because often there will be some understanding that if the agent has been actively submitting the book, that even when you change agencies, if something comes of one of those submissions, the initial agent that made that submission will be the one that is the agent of note, and they get the commission, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, you need to be really careful, not only like signing with an agent, but if you're feeling uncomfortable with that agent, about giving them that next manuscript to submit. Before you do that, really make sure that they're the person that you want to give that manuscript to.
I think we talked about this in the first episode, but also one of the agencies, the first one I was at, had in the agency contract a stipulation about self-publishing. So if the agent had worked at all, and it said at all on a manuscript, and the author decides to self-pub, that agent is entitled to the 15%. And I thought that was really interesting. So
I bet that's going to be coming up more because a lot of people are hybrid.
Yeah, I think so too.
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, I just had to get to ask about this because my agency contract was written back in 2015, and so it does not have any clause about that. So I had to get clarification, and I've actually been thinking that I should get it specifically written into my contract, even though I've already gotten that clarification. But I think you're right; it is something that we're going to be seeing more in agency contracts for sure.
I think you should get it in your contract just because.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, so what it came down to was that they would not take a commission on it, but they would like to handle the foreign rights and whatnot, which is great with me because I would also enjoy them to handle the foreign rights. Also because they have the capability of putting together a competitive situation overseas, where I don't. I'm not going to be getting multiple foreign publishers to like bid against each other because I don't have those contacts, but they do. So that's great. But yeah, I would like to get that in writing for sure. So as we close out, we've talked a little bit about, making sure you understand your goals and why you're doing this and what your priorities are. And everybody has different priorities. I think for all of us, we're pretty much like, we're doing this full time now. We want to continue doing this full time. And this is a huge, we want to get the best deals, right? Like that we possibly can, or we want to be as successful as we can. But everyone goes into it with a different priority. Do you think that I don't know, I guess, do you think that could potentially change the equation for people? Is there ever a situation when you think one of these agents who's primarily submitting to small presses could actually be useful for someone, or do you just think basically not ever? I'll send it over to Ginny.
I don't know why I have to go first.
I was just laughing at your facial expression.
I'm thinking, I'm stalling. I think, like you said, people do have different priorities. And I think not always, because a lot of people don't know what they're getting into. But I think sometimes those people that do end up going with those particular agents that do those really small press submissions, not always, but sometimes they feel like they've exhausted a lot of the other avenues. And if they know what they're getting into and their primary goal is to have a book, that is published that they can hold in their hand or that they can show, and say, yes, I did this, look what I did, and that's a valid thing to want. And I think if that's the thing you want and you're fully aware of what's going on and that's what you want to do, then there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the problem comes in when your expectations don't match up with the agent that you're going to end up with. But if that's what you want going in, and that's what you're looking for, then that's kind of a different thing.
Yeah, I think you had a nail on the head, just like being very clear. And there are some people, they're like, I wrote a picture book with my grandson and I just want to get it published, right? But I think in that case, even for me in that case, I would say there are some legitimate small presses, local presses that you can go to directly. And obviously you're not going to put any money up front, right? You're going to expect, some sort of advance, and you're going to expect they have some sort of distribution, but they're going to get the illustrator, and they're going to do all of this. And a project like that would be so expensive to self-publish, a fully illustrated children's picture book, for example. So if you are one of those authors, like I just know that I feel like I have met a lot of those authors through various events who, maybe are kind of dabbling in these picture books and they want to see them fully illustrated and all of this. And I think that's a case when going to a smaller press directly might be a great answer. If you're not wanting to necessarily make a career of this and you've exhausted those options that you wanted to try, that might be great. But I still don't know that I would see any need to work with an agent for something like that.
I mean, the only possible benefit there is not having to track those presses down yourself. I mean, and if that's worth it to you, then maybe it is. But I would have to think really hard about whether or not it was.
Yeah, being very clear-eyed about it. Alysha, what would you say?
I say the same thing. I do have a family member that I could see wanting an agent that does this because, they just want to see their book in print, but they're a little bit older, not very comfortable using the internet. So I think they would like to have someone do it for them and not necessarily care if they're paid. They just want to see it in book form.
Yeah,
which is fine.
It's fine. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all just about your goal and making sure you're getting everything that you wanted, from this experience. I think that's the important thing. Scarlett, what do you want to add?
I think I have nothing to add.
Well,
I mean,
I think there is that question, like we kind of talked about, like, is this a situation in which you would be much better off self-publishing than working with an agent? And I think it's really going to depend on your book, and it's probably like what you're writing. It's probably a bigger conversation, but I mean, do you think it's important that people really consider that as a valid option, or is it specifically maybe for people who are willing to put that work in, right? Is that a big part of that consideration?
It depends on your goals. And I say I had no expectations, but I've always wanted to be an author, and the goal was always to be a full-time author, right? And I don't know. I think that's hard to say. It just depends on what you're doing and what you you could invest a lot of money in a picture book and self-publish it if you wanted to. If that's what you really want to do, is share it with the world. But it's so difficult for me because I'm in this space where I decided to self-publish because querying agents didn't work for me. It didn't make me happy, right? And but when I self-published, that was like the best thing ever for me. And I did not expect to reach what I reached. So I even say that with, like, I don't know, like, I wanted obviously greatness, but I didn't think I would really get there, I think. And so everything is a surprise. So I think that I had to get to a place where I trusted myself. Like, here we are with emotion again. But, writing is a very emotional journey for me, and so was querying. Clearly, I led with my emotions on that. I chose to do something that made me happier. So yeah, I think in that, I just go with my gut on a lot of things. Alysha, we talked about this. I love Kim's perspective because she always brings us back to like numbers, language, and
right.
I'm just like, no,
I don't trust my gut.
My heart tells me this. Yeah. So yeah, I just really followed my heart, which sounds really cheesy, but it's what I 10 out of 10 recommend. But if you're going to go with an agent who is just going to submit to small presses, you can do that yourself, and then you won't have to give them 15% of your income.
Yeah.
So think practically like that.
Well, yeah, but I like what you said about your expectations. Like, you went way beyond even what your expectations were in the beginning, and kind of giving yourself room to do that is an important consideration, and not necessarily tying yourself down to someone who isn't, and to an agent who maybe doesn't have that big of a reach. I think that is important to keep in mind. But man, I think we've covered a lot of the agent red flags, and we mentioned the SIFWA resource, the Writer Beware Agent Red Flags, and that link is in the description. So check that out. And we will be back next week at the same time, Monday at 7 p.m. CST. If anyone has a topic that they would like to see covered, go ahead and put that in the comments, and we'll try to get it for a future episode. But thanks everyone for joining me tonight. I think there's a lot of good information that came out today. All right, well, I will, Jerry, I guess we named him Jerry now. So
I like that.
Go ahead. I always wave goodbye with Jerry. So I'll go ahead then and wave goodbye with Jerry, and have a good night, everyone.